Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about pen and ink. And really all that we mean when we say pen and ink is using a pen on a piece of paper. Sometimes artists will also use a wash, which means taking ink like this, liquid ink, and applying it with a brush. In the old days, they would use a quill, and quills are actually really lovely because the end of the quill kind of opens and closes in a way that can make for some really nice effects. But for today, any pen will work. Use your sketchbook, that would be ideal, but you can draw on anything. I bet most of you have doodled when you're on the phone and such things like that. So let's look at a few options. Okay. I love this guy. First, let me get rid of my face. I just wanted to show up for a minute and say hi. Still here. Hope you're all making art. And now, time for me to disappear. There we go. Okay, so slide that out. There we go. Here, I just love this drawing. Of course, I say that about so many drawings, but what we have here is a very skillful use of the large and the small lines, something that we also call lost and found line, where in some cases you press harder and then you'll lighten up to like a feather touch. Now, if an artist is using a nib or some kinds of pens that respond well to pressure, then they can create that effect simply with the stroke. But sometimes an artist might choose to go over a line again if the pen doesn't have that as an option. So here I want you to notice also how the foreground is dark, and as the dog goes away from us, the pen strokes are so much lighter, which helps us to have a feeling of depth. Okay, well, this is just a trippy eye. In some ways, I think you could all do a version of this. I'm sure you could. Now, what we have here is a pretty heavy stroke with the pen and what we call cross-hatching, which is the back and forth here. Now, there's a handout that you'll be receiving that, actually, let me take that back. There are several handouts that have all sorts of different techniques and examples of them that you'll get to practice. And this is one of the most common, which is cross-hatching. It has a certain effect, almost a feeling of agitation in this case. Now, I want you to notice also the eyelashes. Okay, we all have eyelashes, but we do not always see the eyelashes. And if you feel the need to draw them all in, then you'll probably find yourself having a weird looking eye. So treat the eyelashes with caution. She's got some pretty good ones that have been pasted on. Yeah, I mean, these are exaggerated. So I wanted to point that out. What's next? Okay, so this is by Maurice Sendak, a very famous children's book author who did Where the Wild Things Are. That's the books that he wrote and illustrated. Maybe some of you had these read to you when you were young, or you might have seen the movie Where the Wild Things Are. But whatever, if this is the first time or if you're very familiar, notice how he does his pen and ink strokes. Also notice that the eyes are very simple. I mean, it's not supposed to be realistic, but it's a pretty effective cartoon, wouldn't you say? And look at how the pen and ink just goes back and forth and he makes texture. You might want to use this one as a sample to use to learn from. What's next? Here's another of our techniques. It's called pointillism, or making a lot of dots. Now, first off, it's a cute kitty. You can always make points with a cute kitty, just so you know. But this actual technique is one that can be very time consuming, and maybe you have a little time on your hands, so that could be a fun one. But it is also a good way to be effective. Students often have a success when they're doing the dots. However, just don't overdo it because you can't roll back dots. Notice how, this is something I like to talk about, but look at how this artist, when you come up from the nose, the line goes straight up to the ear. So that's an example of this harmony that we see in the natural world. We always look for that. Look for how one aspect of the form will relate to another. In this case, we're looking how the ear relates to the eye, relates to the nose and the mouth, and on and on. We just can't get enough of cute kitties. Here's more of the same, also done with pointillism. Now there might be a little bit more, no, looks like it's pretty much all pointillism. Notice how, now this is a little bit of a trick. The artist did not put dots where the whiskers are. So your first thought might be to do the whiskers, but no, leave them out. Wow, isn't this something? So this is what we would call an architectural drawing. And it's a great way to make a drawing when if you're traveling or if you're sitting on your back porch and you want to make some art but you don't want to bring the whole production. Pen and ink is really good for that. Now here what we have is some wonderful work in perspective, which we'll be studying in the next week or two. And that really relates to how objects come towards us or go back in space, and we can create that illusion using the tools of drawing. Well, here's another landscape. Here's what I love about this one. Check the reflections on the water. You see how all they did was make diagonal lines, and yet the way that they placed them, I'd like for you to study that and notice that, because reflections are really not hard to render at all. It just takes practice and a certain turn of the mind, where when you look at the water, you see the patterns and reflections, and just recreate that. One trick, it'll often seem, when you're in the middle of making patterns and reflections, it will often seem like this is crazy, this doesn't look right, but it will look right when you're finished. Okay, here's a frog. What shall I say about that? Looks like they're using a couple of the techniques that we'll be using. It's pretty simple. One thing is that the thing that the frog is hanging onto has no pen and ink, which makes the frog sort of stand out. Here's a favorite, a shoe. Now, if we were in the classroom, you would probably all have the option of taking off your shoes. Not everybody loves to do that, but a shoe is always a good standby to draw. You're thinking what to draw? Put your shoe up on the table and away you go. Here's more shoes. Now look at how, in this case, the artist has used primarily diagonal lines. What we know about that is that it will make the drawing have a certain energy, like agitation, like it's too much coffee shoe or something like that. Oh, and one more shoe. This one almost looks like a Zentangle. See how they've done all the patterning? And then there's pointillism that's on the sole of the shoe. That's a nicely rendered one, totally different than the last one. Let's see, right back up here. Oh, speaking of Zentangle, this is our favorite, the Mona Lisa. But look closely. Let me see, I don't know if I can zoom you in, but you can zoom in at home. Look at how, what it really is a bunch of little cartoon pictures all put together to create the Mona Lisa. Maybe you'll want to end up doing something like that. So this concludes our little sampling of pen and ink drawings. You can search yourself and see some of the other things that people do with pen and ink. But most important, get out the pen, get out the sketchbook, and just get started. Remember, judgment slows us down. If I look at it, or if I think, oh, it's terrible, even as I'm just getting started, then what good is that? Just keep making art, because every stroke you make teaches you something. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for listening.